Imagine a scream, one that makes your blood run cold. Now imagine that scream is your job. You must take a red-hot cauldron of boiling oil and pour it into an open, gaping wound on a soldier's leg. It was the 16th century. Gunpowder was a diabolical novelty, and all the physicians in Europe were convinced it poisoned the body. The only cure, they believed, was to burn out the venom with fire and pain. Day after day, young barber surgeon Ambroise Paré did as he was taught, cauterizing wounds and listening to men beg for death. But one night, after a brutal battle for Turin, the oil ran out. The wounded were brought in endlessly, and he had nothing in his hands, an empty cauldron. That night, for the first time, he broke all the rules. He mixed whatever was at hand, egg yolk, rose oil, and turpentine. After dressing the wounds, he went to sleep, certain that by morning he would find all his patients dead. This was a time when the world stood on the brink of a new horror. The air everywhere smelled of smoke and iron. Arquebuses, an unprecedented weapon, fired lead bullets that didn't just pierce armor. They tore flesh, shattered bones, carrying dirt, gunpowder, and scraps of fabric deep into the wound. For the physicians of that era, this was more than just lead. It was black magic, a devilish poison corrupting a man from within. And against such a poison, they believed, there was only one remedy: fire. Treatment was torture, and the surgeon was almost an executioner. Salvation came through an agony that was sometimes worse than death itself. And into this very cauldron of pain and screams stepped one man, Ambroise Paré. He was neither a scholar nor a noble physician, just a simple barber surgeon, handed a red-hot ladle and taught one rule: gunpowder is poison, and poison must be burned out. He didn't argue. He simply did his terrible work, day after day, soldier after soldier. This was the right way. This was how everyone did it. But that night under Turin, the universal horror became personal. The wounded arrived in an endless stream. Then, the bottom of the cauldron ominously scraped. The oil was gone. In an instant, the only law of medicine he knew ceased to function. Dozens of dying men lay before him, and in his hands there was only emptiness and despair. That night passed in dead silence, a silence more terrifying than any scream. As soon as dawn broke, Paré went to his patients, already prepared to count the dead. He checked on those for whom there had been enough oil. They writhed in fever, their wounds swollen, black, and inflamed. All as usual, the familiar, correct hell. Then, holding his breath, he approached the others, those he had dressed with his makeshift mixture the day before. He froze. They were sleeping, without fever, without groans. One even smiled at him. He carefully lifted a bandage and saw not pus and a burn, but a clean, healing wound. In that moment, he understood. The greatest mistake was not his homemade ointment. The greatest mistake was the boiling oil. From that day on, he stopped believing in books. Other physicians quoted ancient authors, debating theories written centuries ago. But Paré looked at people. This was his gift, his only magic. He didn't seek complex answers in dusty tomes. He saw simple truth in the eyes of the wounded. His genius lay not in what he invented, but in what he stopped doing. He simply removed the cauldron. He understood that a surgeon's main task is not to interfere, not to add more pain to what is already there. Nature, he realized, is the great healer, and man should only assist it, clean the wound, soothe it, and allow the body to do its work. He didn't invent a miracle. He simply trusted common sense. But in Paris, his common sense was considered audacity. The entire learned college of surgeons, all the professors in their heavy robes, rose against him. Who was he? A simple barber, barely able to write. He hadn't read the ancient Greeks, didn't know Latin, and they were the pillars of science, whose ancestors had treated kings. They wrote lampoons against him, called his methods quackery, and him an ignorant butcher. For them, his discovery was not a breakthrough but an insult. It meant that for hundreds of years they, the great minds, had been wrong, that their wisdom, their books, their status, all of it was a lie, and they were not about to forgive a commoner who dared to prove it. But fate loves to mock the arrogant. One day on the battlefield, François de Guise, one of France's greatest generals, was gravely wounded. A splintered spear shaft entered under his right eye and exited at the back of his head. All the court physicians declared the wound fatal. No one dared even touch him. And then the desperate king ordered the barber to be brought. Paré approached the dying man, placed his foot on his shoulder for leverage, and gripping the fragment with forceps, pulled the wood from his head. Then, to everyone's horror, he began to dress the wound with his ointment. A month passed, and Francois de Guise, alive and well, returned to active duty. After that, the argument ceased. The king made him his personal surgeon, and yesterday's butcher became the nation's savior. And the battlefield changed. Before him, a wounded man's scream was the beginning of torture. The surgeon approached with a cauldron of boiling oil to burn out the poison, bringing only new agony. After him, a scream became simply a cry of pain, met by those rushing with clean bandages. Paré didn't so much invent something new as abolish the old and monstrous. He proved that the body is not an enemy to be subdued with fire, but an ally that merely needs help. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers who sustained injuries in dozens of wars after him survived, not because they were treated in a new way, but because they were no longer mutilated in the old way. Surgery ceased to be a punishment. For the first time, it became salvation. He served 4 kings, and into his old age, when asked about his great secret, he would merely smile. Everyone expected him to name secret herbs, to reveal a miracle ointment recipe. But he said that a surgeon's most important medicine was not the scalpel, nor the ointment, but his eyes. Other doctors looked into books, seeking answers from those long dead. But he looked into the wound, seeking an answer from the one still alive. They read dead Latin. He read the living pain on a man's face. This was his entire genius. Sometimes, to save, one simply needs to stop reading other people's clever thoughts, and dare to see everything with one's own eyes.